It's a fact. If you make stuff, fix stuff, clean stuff, or paint stuff, you'll generate waste that you'll need to get rid of. All businesses have to deal with some kind of waste, from auto repair shops, to hospitals, to manufacturing plants. As a business owner, you have to take waste disposal seriously and realize that some wastes are considered dangerous and need to be disposed of properly, not in the dumpster or down the drain. Determining whether or not your business generates waste that's dangerous, identifying its makeup and the potential dangers it represents, is a process called designation. This video will explain designation, what it is, why it's important, and how you go about doing it.
Managing your dangerous waste in Washington is an incredibly important part of running your business successfully in this state.
We ask businesses to designate their dangerous waste so they know what's harmful, so they know what the risks are. If it could light on fire, if it's ignitable, if it could burn them, if it's corrosive, if it's toxic, so it could hurt them or hurt critters in the environment. So that designation process is really important for their safety and also for the safety of others around them in our natural environment.
If your business or facility generates waste, you are legally responsible for knowing if your waste is dangerous. And if it is dangerous, you need to make sure that it's handled safely while on site and then disposed of properly.
Most generators of dangerous waste use a hazardous waste service provider to do the designation work. They'll code your waste, usually based on information that you provide or the industry you're in. If needed, they might pull samples and run tests.
Hazardous waste service providers are often helpful to businesses because they can take information that a business provides and help them understand those codes and the regulations that apply. They often have a lot of experience with designation and they can be quite helpful.
So, if there are companies that will take that on, and most businesses in Washington State that generate dangerous waste use them, why do we need to learn about designation and all this dangerous waste business?
I'll tell you why, and this is something very important to remember. The waste your business generates is your waste. Even if you hire a company to designate and dispose of it for you. It's your responsibility from cradle to grave.
Ultimately, the buck stops with the business. So even if I contract, I'm the business, I contract with somebody to help me out with this, ultimately I'm responsible.
We have to make sure that we have the right stuff on that label, that it has been designated correctly.
If the waste is identified improperly, if it's not disposed of correctly, the responsibility and the costs are yours. And the cost of cleaning up improperly disposed waste after the fact is very expensive.
A facility that I know of had created a small pool and was putting all of their waste in that pool out in the open without designating, and that ended up costing that company $60,000.
Proper designation keeps your workers safe. It supports better communication about safe handling, transport, and disposal. And it's obviously good for the environment to keep these dangerous materials from contaminating our air, land, and water. Oh, and it's the law.
You know, the pros of designating your waste is ultimately protecting yourself and protecting your liability. So if you don't take the time to figure out if something, as an example, will spontaneously light on fire at the landfill, when it gets to the landfill and that happens, you better believe that they'll be able to track it back to you. And then ultimately it's going to cost you a lot more money and you could have placed somebody at risk.
So you know you have waste because it's something you want to get rid of. And you want to designate your waste because it's the right thing to do, or because it's the law, or both. So how do you start? First, let's gather a few things we'll need. 1, a list of wastes your business generates and what you know about them.
A combination of knowledge on what is in that waste and what process generated that waste will lead you to the correct waste codes.
2, you should also gather safety data sheets, or MSDSs, for products your business uses.
Generally, what you get from an MSDS or an SDS is what is in the particular thing that you're using.
There's a whole range of information that you can find on an MSDS sheet.
That safety data sheet corresponds to a product that you brought into your facility and then used in some manner. So it's not necessarily going to have the same constituents as it had when it was a product. The safety data sheet can be a good first step. It's not the be-all, end-all of designation.
3, get yourself a copy of the Dangerous Waste Regulations. It's available online at the Department of Ecology website, or you can request a free printed copy. We'll be referring to sections of the Dangerous Waste Regulations throughout this video, and it will come in quite handy when you're actually designating your waste. Here we have an auto body repair shop. They sand, they prime, they mix, they paint. There's some highly skilled work going on here, and as with all businesses, it generates waste.
Right here, this is where we dispose of our unused paints and solvents. This is designated as a D001 code and an F003 code. So when we dispose of this, our paint vendor that picks up our hazardous waste can take care of this with those codes. They know what it is and we know what it is.
Whenever something designates as dangerous waste, it's going to have a code or a number of codes.
A hazardous waste code is going to be 4 characters. An example would be D001, which would be an ignitable waste. When you send that waste off-site, you've got somebody who's going to transport it, you've got somebody who's going to dispose of it. So if they saw the code D001, they'd know that that's ignitable. It's a fire risk.
We ask people to label drums of dangerous waste, and that label has, specific information. It doesn't have to look a certain way. In fact, you could take a napkin and write this information on it and stick it on the drum. But it needs to say hazardous waste or dangerous waste. It needs to tell you, me, everybody what the risk is. Is it ignitable? Is it corrosive? Is it toxic? What harm can come to me if I go over and I jiggle that drum? So the risk needs to be on there. And then the date that you started generating it. And what that does is it allows you as a business owner to kind of inventory things, to minimize the risk while it's at your site, keep it there only a short amount of time. And then while it is there, you're broadcasting to everybody what harm could come to them if they mess with it.
Well, here's some good news. Right out of the gate, some waste streams are mostly exempt or excluded from dangerous waste rules because there are pathways in place for how to manage them. Things like used oil, car batteries, or scrap metal.
Some wastes that you have in your facility will designate as dangerous wastes, but are excluded from the dangerous waste rules, which means that you don't have to manage them as dangerous waste. Some examples of this could be used oil. If you properly manage used oil, it is not considered a dangerous waste, but you have to properly manage it.
Come on in here.
In this room, what Bruce has done is he's put his excluded or exempt waste. So it's separate from his hazardous waste, and that way he doesn't cross-contaminate.
We keep our antifreeze waste and our oil waste here.
Right at the very beginning of the regulations, we have a list of things that are excluded or exempted from the regulations. And some of the examples are like scrap metal.
Spent lead acid batteries?
We have an exclusion for antifreeze.
Why? Because we want to reuse it.
And those exemptions, it's important that you're managing the waste as the exemption would ask. For example, used oil needs to be closed and it needs to be labeled on site. That's to make sure that you know you've got a used oil barrel that you're planning on recycling.
And when you have questions about the exclusions, call your regional office and they'll be happy to help you answer those questions.
So let's get back to our example here at the auto body repair shop. Look around. You'll find paints, solvents, dirty rags. Some people might be tempted to just dump some of this stuff in the trash or down the sink. Please no. Before you throw anything into the sink or the trash, you must determine whether it might be dangerous waste.
There are 3 categories of dangerous waste that are regulated by the state of Washington. They are, number 1, listed, which means the waste contains specific chemicals that are on a list.
As you start to look at waste designation, one of the first things you look at is whether or not your waste is listed. In the regulations, there's a long, healthy list of what is and what isn't considered listed.
There's one set of waste that is simply a list of chemicals, and there's another set that's a list of processes. So you need to think about what you do at your shop and check on those lists to determine if either the chemicals or the processes are on either of those lists. And then if you have them, you would know that you have a listed waste.
For example, solvents that are used to clean parts. Certain solvents are listed. Certain activities create listed waste. So if I'm doing aluminum smelting, I create a listed waste. I don't have to go down the path of trying to figure out if it's toxic or not. I know it is because it's listed.
The second group is wastes that are regulated because they have certain risk characteristics. They are ignitable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic.
So there are 4 primary characteristics. Ignitability, you take it to a lab or look at the material safety data sheet. If it has a flash point below 140 degrees Fahrenheit, that's ignitable. Another characteristic is corrosivity. And with corrosivity, what you're looking at is the pH. Third thing we're going to look at as far as characteristics go is reactivity. So does it spontaneously combust? And then the fourth one is toxicity.
And finally, there are those wastes that are Washington state criteria wastes because our state's rules are more protective than the federal government's rules.
And under the federal program, EPA and the RCRA program, they have what's called hazardous waste. So you have the characteristic wastes and listed wastes. And we adopt those and we recognize those as hazardous waste. But we recognize more waste as, say, hazardous waste than what EPA does, and we call those state-only waste. So dangerous waste includes everything that the state considers, quote, hazardous waste, plus everything that EPA considers hazardous waste.
A waste code that begins with the letters P, U, K, or F means the waste is a listed waste. Remember, a listed waste is one that is specifically called out in the dangerous waste regulations. P and U codes are reserved for discarded chemical products. Unused products have become waste and only contain one active ingredient. P-coded wastes are more toxic than U. P and U codes aren't that common and come mainly from labs or medical facilities. The K codes are specific to certain industries, like pulp and paper mills, wood preservation, iron and steel production, and a few others. If you're not in one of these specific industries, you're probably in the clear on K-coded wastes. You can refer to the regulations for a complete list of the K-code descriptions. The most common listed waste codes are the F codes.
F codes are definitely the most common. F codes include in the first 5 segments use solvents.
Solvents are used in all different types of industries, painting and manufacturing and electronics, for cleaning the electronic wafers, gas stations, mechanics, everybody uses solvents.
F001 through F005, we list certain chemicals, okay? After that, we list certain industries again. So what we do is we go and we look in F01, 2, 3, 4, or 5 to find out if any of the chemicals used here happen to be in that list.
Once you've determined whether your waste qualifies for any of the listed codes, P, U, K, or F, you need to know what additional risks may be posed by your waste. Is it ignitable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic? These are known as the characteristic wastes.
And that means that there's a particular characteristic associated with your waste. You can use either generator knowledge. For example, I have a very flammable solvent and I'm making it very dirty, but it's still going to be extremely flammable. You could apply a flammable code or an ignitable code because you're aware of the process that generated that waste. Or if you're not sure, you could do an analytical test.
There are tests to determine whether your waste is ignitable or corrosive. Reactive designation is done through knowledge of the chemicals. There is no test. You can refer to the regulations. As for toxicity, there are currently 40 chemicals that are on the federal D list. heavy metals, pesticides, and organic chemicals. And each one has a specific concentration level at which it gets regulated. If your waste contains one of these 40 chemicals and its concentration is greater than the threshold level, bam, you need to tag it with the appropriate D code.
To look at toxicity, what we do is we get a sample, we prepare it in a certain way that kind of mimes or mimics the conditions in a landfill. So it's kind of an acidic preparation. And then we analyze it to see what comes out, like what is leaching out. It's called a toxicity characteristic leachate procedure. And so you run that TCLP test to figure out whether or not you've got something that's toxic.
One of the other important aspects and a benefit of making sure that you correctly designate your waste is that you won't be mixing wastes. And mixing wastes can be bad for a variety of reasons. If you mix a hazardous waste with a non-hazardous waste, it's now all hazardous waste. You can greatly increase the cost and the volume associated with dealing with that waste when it might not be necessary, when you might not have to do that. You also want to make sure that you're not mixing incompatible wastes. You don't want to put an acid with a base and just watch the reaction. You need to make sure that it goes to the right spot and that they're stored with other like materials.
Let's review. So far, we've asked you to look at your company's waste and answer a few questions. Is the waste exempt or excluded? A few examples are used oil or car batteries. But remember, there are still management requirements in order to meet the terms of exemption. Is it unused, and does it contain only one active ingredient, which is on the P or U list of dangerous wastes, like unused copper cyanide or unused acetone? Does your waste contain a used material described on the F list, like a used solvent, like spent methyl ethyl ketone, or used acetone, or spent solutions from cyanide-based electroplating? And finally, is your waste ignitable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic?
And then one final step. As we mentioned earlier, Washington's rules are more protective than the federal regulations. For example, chemicals that are toxic to fish. So Washington State has additional types of waste that we have determined are dangerous.
Generally speaking, state criteria addresses two things: toxicity and persistence.
Persistence, the way I kind of explain it to businesses is to ask them to imagine a big clunky molecule of something that doesn't want to go anywhere. A good example is a flame retardant. So big clunky brominated molecule that once it gets into the environment, it's going to persist. It's just going to sit around. We dump it into a riverbed. A fish might eat some of that stuff. It stays in that fish's liver until that fish is eaten by a heron. And now it's in the heron. And we want to prevent that.
So when I take a look out here, I'm wondering, well, what could be a Washington State toxic? And it could be something very simple. You could maybe be washing a car with a very aggressive soap, and that soap happens to be toxic enough it'll kill fish. Now that code applies to the wastewater. They have to capture that wastewater and make sure that the wastewater is then handled as a hazardous waste.
Wastes with toxic labels, high concentrations of zinc or copper, epoxy resins are all examples of Washington State-only regulated wastes. Washington State-only regulated waste codes start with the letter W.
My name's Barry Stewart. I'm a director here at Acrofab. I help and oversee the hazardous waste program here. Acrofab is based in Liberty Lake, Washington, which is just on the east side of Spokane. Acrofab is a precision sheet metal and machining manufacturer. We use a couple of different tools here to designate waste. We have a checklist that walks you through the process. One of the other tools that is used in that process, of course, is the MSDS sheet. As we go through the MSDS, it'll tell you if it's reactive, if it's flammable, if there is heavy metals in it.
The first step is to decide that something is waste. If you have a use for it, if somebody else could use it, really try and make the most of all the products that you have. But once you decide something is a waste, I tend to start with P&U listed waste because they're very easy. P&U waste codes are applied to single active ingredient chemicals that are being disposed of as waste. If you have a product and you need to throw it away, it could be a P&U list. Just check the lists. And if it's on there, then you're going to apply those codes. The next step would be K and F codes. If you're not part of those industries in K codes, you already know that those aren't a part of it. F codes are fairly common, but again, they're sort of a process that you'd be going through, so just check those processes. At that point, you've applied all your listed codes and you go for your characteristic codes and start with federal characteristics. And they are ignitable, corrosive, reactive, and toxic. Once you've checked those, you want to start checking your Washington state codes, toxicity and persistence. Once you've gotten through that whole process, then you've designated your waste.
Does this make sense? Let's recap. We started with listed wastes, then characteristics, then Washington state only criteria, and bam, you've got your codes.
And then making sure that you keep the records that go along with that. You're gonna wanna get a copy of your receipts from your vendors, from the folks that take your hazardous waste. When inspectors come to ask you about what you do with your waste, we're gonna ask to see records to confirm what you tell us.
One last thought. The only way to avoid having to designate your dangerous waste is to not generate it in the first place.
Back in the 50s and the 60s, body shops, collision shops generated a lot of waste. Lacquer thinners, gasolines, oils, antifreezes. Over time, that changed with the EPA and Department of Ecology educating shops, bringing things along. The paint guns themselves are what help us not generate the waste. The gun itself, there's not a lot to clean. You can actually clean a gun with just about a teaspoon of lacquer thinner, and it goes into the barrel. There's not much waste at all right there.
Now we should emphasize that designating waste is a complicated process, and you'll need more than this video to do it properly. The Washington State Department of Ecology has online and printed resources available to help you once you do get busy designating your waste. And while our ecology staff won't do the designation work for you, we're certainly here to help and answer questions if the process leaves you stumped.
Designation. It's the right thing to do, it's your responsibility, it's good business, and it keeps us all safe.